The wind had a sound to it that day. Not a howl, not a whisper, but something in between, like a memory trying to crawl back from the dead. It cut low across the Wyoming territory, late winter, when snow turned to crust and sky stayed the color of ash. Pines stood like old soldiers, stripped bare and tired of the cold. The sun, high but hollow, bled through yellow grit, casting everything in the kind of light that made the world look older than it was. Wade Carter rode slow, always did. He wasn't a man given to rushing, not since the war and not since Ella died 2 winters back, with fever in her lungs and his name on her lips. After that, the world got quieter. Not peaceful, just quiet. His mare, Juniper, picked her own pace across the thinning trail. Saddle creaked beneath him. Rifle on his back. Canteen half empty. Wade hadn't spoken a word in 3 days, not even to the horse. Didn't seem necessary. He was checking the far fence line of a land grant he'd never filed for, left to rot somewhere in a drawer back in Cheyenne. Some habits die slower than others. This stretch of land wasn't marked on any proper map. Just 2 fence posts leaning like drunkards in the dust. No gate, no sign. The trail ahead was barely a track, swallowed by sagebrush and regret. Most men wouldn't come this way. You'd have to already be lost to find it. Wade tugged at the brim of his hat and rode on. The silence suited him. It stretched long and hollow across the hills, broken only by the soft groan of leather and the distant caw of a crow riding the wind like it knew where it was going. But Wade didn't, not really. He just kept riding forward, not towards something, but away from everything else. And that was when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Soft, high, almost swallowed by the wind. A baby's cry. And just like that, the land stopped being quiet. At first, he thought the wind was playing tricks. It rose again, that sound. Thin, warbling, almost too soft to matter. But it wasn't the wind. Wade knew the wind. This was different. This was human. He pulled back on the reins, listening harder. Juniper tossed her head once, uneasy. There it was again. A cry, weak and uneven, like lungs just learning how to use air. He dismounted slow, bootsteps muffled by hard dirt and frost. No trail, no sign of recent riders. Just a stand of dying mesquite and the last of winter's breath clinging to the ground. Wade stepped through brush and splintered fence rails, one hand on the butt of his rifle, not drawn, but thinking about it. Then he saw her, tied upright to a post, body slack but still standing because the rope wouldn't let her fall. Bare feet purple with cold, dress torn across the side, hair long and matted, clinging to her face like it belonged to someone else. She wasn't looking at her. Her eyes were open, yes, but vacant, hollow. Not scared, not pleading, just gone. And at her feet, bundled in an old saddle blanket, were 2 babies, newborns, maybe a day old. One of them stirred, mewled like a kitten lost in snow. The other didn't move at all, eyes open, slow blinking, like the world had already worn her out. Wade crouched down, watched her chest rise, barely. Her lips parted, voice cracked like gravel. "Don't let 'em take 'em." That's all she said. Then her knees gave and she sagged forward against the rope. Wade moved fast but careful, unhooked his knife, sliced through the knot. Her arms dropped like dead weight. He caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed nothing. He looked around, noticed smoke in the distance, old smoke curling from the chimney of a half-collapsed homestead. Whoever had done this wasn't far gone, but Wade wasn't chasing anyone today. He gathered the twins first, tucked them inside his coat like they were made of glass. Then he lifted the woman, and for the first time in years, turned toward home. Wade didn't speak. There wasn't anything to say. The woman in his arms, still nameless, was barely conscious. Her skin, cold as tin left out overnight. The twins tucked inside his coat whimpered, one louder than the other. They were warm enough for now. He tightened the flaps of his duster around them, then shifted her weight and started walking. The mare followed behind without protest, reins loosed in his grip. Snow fell light and slow, the kind that didn't sting, just settled on his shoulders, her lashes, the baby's blanket. By the time he reached the cabin, dusk was already bleeding into the trees. The place wasn't much. One room, a stove that smoked when the wind shifted, roof patched with canvas and stubbornness. But it was dry. And for now, it was far enough from whoever had left her out there to die. He kicked the door open with his boot, stepped inside. Warmth hit like a whisper. A fire still crackled low in the stove. He never let it die, habit more than comfort. He laid her down on the cot, unwrapped the girls, checked them for frost. Both breathing. That was something. He worked quiet, pulled a quilt over her body, checked her wrists, raw, bleeding. Rope burns deep. Her face was swelling near the eye. A bruise blossomed along her collarbone. He looked away, set water to boil, pulled the last of the goat's milk from its tin, mixed it with rainwater, poured it into 2 tiny jars. The babies drank like they'd been waiting their whole lives. Only when they fell asleep did Wade finally sit down. He didn't take off his coat, didn't light the lantern, just sat in the glow of the fire and watched her breathe. Didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but none of that mattered right now. Somewhere behind him, snow tapped soft against the window pane. The world outside kept spinning, uncaring. But in here, a man who hadn't spoken in 3 days had just made a choice, and it was loud enough to echo.
You can guess what's about to happen? Leave your prediction in the comments. Like the video to motivate me to make the next videos. The cabin groaned when the wind shifted, not from age alone, though it had plenty of that, but from how it leaned, slightly, like it remembered something heavy. The roof held, barely. The walls gave up their warmth easy, but the fire inside still burned. Wade made sure of that. He carried Clara across the threshold with the same quiet care he used to lift fence posts. Placed her down on the cot like something too light, too breakable. Her skin was still cold, her breath shallow. The twins, wrapped against his chest inside the folds of his duster, had stopped fussing, lulled by motion and heat. He moved like a man who'd done this before, though he hadn't. Not with women, not with babies, not with anyone needing more than silence and wood chopped. The girls drank warm goat milk from jars while the storm curled its fingers around the cabin walls. Wade didn't say much, didn't say anything really, just kept to the motions. Fire, water, blankets, another log on the flames, a pot warming broth, a cot checked for damp spots. When Clara stirred, it was with a wince and a question in her eyes. Not one she spoke, just held. The kind of question women carry after too many men failed to answer anything right. Wade didn't answer. He just stood, pressed a folded cloth to her forehead, and nodded once. Not a greeting, a signal. You're safe now. That was all it meant. She turned her face to the wall. The twins slept in a drawer pulled from a busted cabinet lined with an old flannel shirt. Wade sat nearby, near enough to hear their breath, far enough not to crowd the woman in his bed. He didn't even take off his boots, just leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, eyes open. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, everything stilled.
The next morning, Clara opened her eyes again, cautious. A bruise now bloomed along her cheekbone, ugly in daylight. She didn't speak. Neither did he. By midday, she sat up on her own, moved slow, measured. Wade offered broth in a tin cup and looked away while she drank. He refilled the fire, checked the goats, hauled water, everything in his rhythm. They shared the same room, but not yet the same air. She flinched when the floorboards creaked, tensed when he stepped too close. But she didn't ask him to leave, and he didn't. When night came, the babies stirred again. One of them cried sharp, the other followed like an echo. Wade moved first, lifted them with careful arms, rocking slow, boots soft on the floorboards. Clara watched, eyes wide but unreadable. She didn't speak. He didn't look back. But neither of them turned away. In the stillness between snow and silence, something unspoken began to take root. Not trust, not yet, but the quiet promise of it. By the third day, Clara was walking again. Not far, not fast, just from the cot to the chair near the window. Her movements were careful, like each limb still asked permission before moving. Wade didn't offer help. He didn't hover. But he did shift the chair closer to the fire, left an extra quilt folded there without a word. She noticed, said nothing. He carved the rattles late at night, pine scraps from a busted fence rail, smoothed down the edges with his knife, shaped little flowers on the handle. No one asked him to, no one saw him do it. When the sun came up, he left them on the windowsill next to the cradle drawer, walked out before anyone stirred. When Clara found them, she didn't cry. But her hands hovered above the carvings for a long time, like they were sacred somehow. She didn't ask who made them, didn't need to. She tucked them beside the babies and returned to folding cloth with a steady breath. Wade noticed she started humming. Not much, just sometimes when rocking the twins or heating water. A low, breathy tune, no real words, just rhythm. One night she hummed a hymn. Wade paused mid-step. He knew that tune. His mother used to sing it when the wind made the house rattle. He didn't say anything. But when Clara looked up and met his eyes, something passed between them. A recognition, not just of the song, but of loss that didn't shout, just stayed. From then on, things shifted, not by much, not loud. He'd set out bread for 3 instead of 1. She had patched the torn sleeve on his flannel without asking. He'd leave the kettle warm when he rode out in the morning. She'd hang his coat near the fire before dusk. No one said thank you. No one said you're welcome. But it was there. The babies began to settle more easily. Wade watched one of them wrap tweeny fingers around Clara's thumb and hold on like it was all she had. He didn't look away. Neither did Clara. She stood longer now, stirred stew with practiced hands, even smiled once, faint and surprised, like it caught her off guard. Wade saw it but didn't react, just poured more water into the basin and handed her a towel. That night, after the girls were asleep, Wade sat by the door sharpening his blade. Clara folded linens near the fire. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It breathed. In the soft rhythm of shared quiet, trust didn't ask for permission. It simply began to live there. The first nightmare came on the 5th night. Clara had fallen asleep in the chair, one of the twins curled in her arms. The fire was dying low, throwing long, uneven shadows across the walls. Wade sat near the door, blade in hand, working the edge against a whetstone like it was a kind of prayer. Then she cried out, not loud, but sharp. A wordless sound, cracked and raw, like something breaking underwater. The baby stirred, whined. Wade moved before thinking. He stepped across the room, reached for the child, lifted her gently from Clara's arms. Clara jolted upright, breath ragged, eyes wide. "He said I wasn't worth feeding," she whispered. Wade didn't ask who he was. He didn't press, didn't frown, didn't soften. just stood there holding the baby, steady as stone. Then he reached for the kettle, poured warm water into a tin cup, and set it on the table near her shaking hands. Clara didn't thank him, but she took it. That was enough. The next day she moved slower. Like her ribs still remembered hands they didn't belong to. She didn't speak much, hadn't from the start. But this silence was different. It wasn't fear. It was memory, close and clawing. Wade didn't break the quiet. Instead, he fixed the latch on the back window, hauled more wood, rehung the oil lamp so the light wouldn't cast shadows behind her chair. Clara noticed. That evening, while he was outside checking the goats, she wandered near the mantel. Her fingers brushed across an old leather-bound book tucked between a lantern and a rusted horseshoe. She pulled it out. Psalms. Inside the cover, in a faded hand, read, "To Wade, for when the silence gets heavy, Ma." She opened it. Pages well thumbed. Margins lined with notes, not sermons, just thoughts. One verse, underlined twice, smudged with what looked like water damage or maybe a tear. "He healeth the broken in heart and bindeth up their wounds." Wade came in, boots light on the floor. "You read scripture?" she asked, still holding the book. He looked at her, then at the pages in her hand. "Only the parts that feel like songs," he said. She nodded, closed the cover, and set it gently back in place. Nothing more was said. But later that night, when Wade laid a fresh log on the fire and Clara tucked both girls beneath a clean quilt, something had shifted again. They didn't speak of the past, but they didn't hide from it anymore either. In that little room, beneath snow-covered rafters and psalm-worn pages, grief found company, and for once it didn't have to explain itself. By the end of the second week, a rhythm had settled into the cabin, like dust in the rafters. Wade rose before dawn, always the first to stoke the fire, his movements quiet but certain. Clara, no longer flinching at every footstep, would be up soon after, rocking one of the twins or boiling water for wash. They spoke little, but they didn't have to. The silence had changed, no longer sharp. Now it breathed with them. He carved a spoon one morning, not because she asked, but because he saw her struggle with the bent metal one. She found it by the basin, ran her fingers over the wood grain like it was something rare. She'd begun singing again, low, quiet songs from childhood, songs that clung to the corners of the room and settled over the girls like soft quilts. Wade never joined in, but sometimes he tapped his boot to the rhythm when he thought she wasn't looking. Life inside the cabin wasn't loud, but it was growing, which is why the knock at the post out front felt like thunder. Wade was still outside, hauling feed from the shed when the woman rode up. Clara saw her first from the window, a figure in a stiff black bonnet atop a mule with a red-stitched blanket. Mrs. Evelyn Ridge. Clara froze. Evelyn didn't dismount, just called out, sharp as a hawk's cry. "Thought I might find you here, miss." Wade came up from the barn, eyes narrowing just a bit. "Got some flour for you, Wade," Evelyn said with a smirk. "Heard you're feedin' 3 mouths now. One of 'em don't even carry your name." Clara stepped back from the window. Inside, the twins stirred. Evelyn sniffed the air like judgment had a scent. "You know how folks talk, Wade. A woman with 2 babes and no ring, that don't sit right with decent folk." Wade walked up, took the sack of flour. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Names don't mean much to God, or me." Evelyn's lips thinned. She gave Clara one last glance, sharp, slicing, then turned her mule and rode off slow, the red blanket flapping behind like a flag of warning. That night, Clara didn't sew, didn't sing. She just sat by the fire, eyes on the flames, jaw tight. Wade fixed the hinge on the front door, quiet as always. The only sound between them was the soft tick of burning pine and the rustle of baby breath from the cradle. Finally, Clara said, "They'll never stop reminding me I don't belong." Wade didn't look up, just answered, "You belong here." She didn't reply, but she didn't leave the fire either. In the space between judgment and grace, they held the line, thin, quiet, but strong enough to stand on. The snow had begun to thaw. Small things started waking, creeks trickling beneath the crust, birds calling low from distant pines.
Clara stood on the porch with one of the girls nestled against her shoulder, humming under her breath. Wade was splitting wood a few yards off, his axe rhythm steady as a clock. She almost smiled. Then the horses came, 3 of them, riders in oilskin coats, dust crusted into every seam. The lead one rode hard, eyes locked on the cabin like it owed him something. Clara went still, breath cut short. Her knees nearly buckled. Wade saw them, didn't rush. He set the axe down easy, wiped his hands on his coat, and walked toward the porch. Not in fear, not in anger, just ready. The lead rider pulled his horse to a halt and swung down, boots thudding heavy. Hank, Clara's brother-in-law. 2 cousins flanked him, rifles slung but not aimed. Yet. "She's my kin," Hank said, voice low and sharp. "And those girls got my brother's blood." Wade didn't blink. "And she don't belong here." "She does now." Clara stood frozen in the doorway. One of the twins started fussing. She rocked gently, trying to hush the child and her own rising terror. Hank stepped forward, spitting to the side. "You think hiding her up here makes you a hero? You think you know what she's done?" Wade answered slow.
"I know she's breathing. I know them girls are safe. That's enough for me." The cousins shifted in their saddles. One unsnapped the leather strap on his rifle. Wade didn't move. "You ride back, or I bury 3 more before supper." A long silence stretched. Cold, tight. Hank snarled, "She ain't worth all this." Wade's eyes never left his. "Still more woman than you'll ever be, man." For a moment, Clara thought someone would die right there. But then Hank turned, spit again, and mounted. "This ain't over," he muttered, then rode off down the hill, his cousins behind. Wade watched them until they disappeared beyond the tree line. Then, and only then, did he turn to Clara. "You all right?" She nodded, but her hands trembled on the baby's back. He stepped closer, not touching, not crowding, just there. "They'll come again," she said. "Then I'll be here again," he answered. That night no hymns were sung, but the fire burned brighter than ever. The letter came in a brown envelope, edges curled from the journey. Wade found it in town, buried beneath grain sacks at the general store.
It bore no return name, just an address in Missouri and a script that looked like it had been written by someone who didn't know what hope felt like anymore. He didn't open it until after chores were done. Clara sat by the hearth, twins curled against her sides, humming softly. Wade handed her the envelope, then stepped back like he was handing off a loaded gun. She read it slow. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Inside was an offer from distant kin she barely remembered. A parcel of land, a room of her own, safety and name restored. A promise of help so long as she came alone. The words were clear, the implication louder. You get the girls, you get shelter, but leave the shame behind. Clara folded the letter and held it in her lap like it might vanish if she squeezed it hard enough. Wade didn't speak. Instead, he went to the back room, dug out her old saddlebag and began to pack it. Clothes, a tin of tea, the wooden rattles. He moved steady, no hesitation. just the kind of grief that knew how to walk on 2 feet. When he brought the bag to her feet, he said, "You'll be all right." It wasn't goodbye, not quite, but it wasn't a question either. She didn't reply. That night, the cabin sat in stillness again, but not the kind they'd grown used to. This silence had edges. It waited. Clara didn't sleep, just sat on the porch with the bag beside her and one of the twins tucked into her chest, heart beating like it couldn't make up its mind. Wade stepped out at dawn. The air was sharp, sky pale and unsure. He didn't ask her anything, but she did. "Do you want me to go?" He met her eyes, slower than usual, as if the question had weight enough to tip the whole world. "I want you to stay," he said, "but only if it's yours to want." The sun cracked the edge of the hills. Light slid across the porch boards, warming the tips of her boots. She looked down at the saddlebag, then at the baby sleeping against her, then at Wade. She didn't speak, just reached for his hand and didn't let go. The bag stayed on the porch, untouched. No dust, no snow. Clara brushed it off each morning, as if maybe tomorrow she'd pick it up, but she never did. 3 days passed like that. Wade didn't mention the letter again. He fed the goats, split wood, carved handles for the kitchen drawers like always, but his eyes lingered longer when she passed. His boots waited a beat before stepping away when she walked into the same room. And Clara, she moved slower around the space. Not because she was afraid, but like she was trying it on, measuring something invisible, listening for something that wasn't sound. That 4th evening, she didn't sit by the fire. Instead, she stood by the door, watching him. Wade was mending a strap on the baby cradle, calloused fingers working the leather with patient care. "Why'd you fix it?" she asked softly. He didn't look up. Didn't like how it creaked. "That all?" He tied the knot and finally glanced her way. Creaks don't always mean danger. Sometimes just means the wood settling. She took a step closer, then another, till she stood over him. "You keep making space for me," she said, "even when I don't ask." Wade nodded once. "Don't have to ask for shelter, just need to need it." She reached down, took his hand, held it like it was the first thing she'd owned in years. "I ain't going," she said, "not 'cause I'm afraid to leave, but 'cause this finally feels like staying means something." Wade didn't answer with words. He stood, walked past her into the back room, returned with something small wrapped in a cloth, his mother's old silver spoon, polished as best he could. "I don't got a ring," he said, voice low, "but I got a fire that waits for your hands to stoke it." Clara didn't cry, but she smiled, not soft, not fragile, whole. That night she unpacked the saddlebag, folded the clothes back into drawers, hung her shawl by the door next to his. The cradle no longer creaked. The fire burned long into morning, and for the first time 2 chairs sat side by side at the table. Not because anyone said, "We belong to each other," but because everything, the silence, the songs, the scars, had already said it for them. The frost hadn't yet lifted when the riders returned. 3 shadows broke through the tree line. This time, not just Hank and his cousins, but a 4th man with a star pinned to his chest and cold wind stitched into his coat. Marshall Boone, lawman, firm as the stone he was named after. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw them. Her hands froze, clothespins dropping into the snow. Wade stepped out from the barn, eyes narrowing just enough. They didn't charge in, didn't yell. That would have been too easy. They dismounted slow, like men who knew the weight of what they carried. Not guns, though those were there, but paper, authority. Boone held out the document. "Miss Clara, there's a petition signed back in Arkansas. States you removed 2 minors without legal guardianship. There's ink here that says I'm to bring you in." Clara stared at the parchment. Her body didn't move, but inside everything ran. "They're mine," she whispered. "Law says otherwise," Boone replied, calm but final. Wade stepped forward, not quick but sure. He didn't touch his gun, he didn't raise his voice. But he did something rarer in those parts. He stood in front of her. "They're safe here. You want to drag a mother and 2 babies back through winter roads and into a grave someone else dug? You'll have to cross me." Boone looked from Wade to Clara, then to the twins' booties drying on the porch rail. His face didn't shift, but something behind his eyes softened, barely. "Think about it, Marshall," Wade added, voice low. "You take her in, who feeds those girls tonight?" The wind blew. A baby cried inside. And Boone did what no one expected. He folded the paper. "This conversation's not over," he said.
"No," Wade agreed, "but it's not ending today." The riders left. The snow kept falling. But for the first time, Clara didn't go back inside. She stood beside Wade. Sunday came with sharp wind and cloud-split sun. The church bell rang hollow through the hills, calling the faithful and the curious. Clara walked through the door with one baby on her hip, the other in a sling across her chest. Her dress was plain, worn at the sleeves, but her spine was straight as a rail. Wade followed behind her, slow and sure, hat in hand. Inside, whispers rustled like dry leaves. Mrs. Evelyn Ridge clutched her hymnal tighter. The pastor, Reverend Cale, looked up mid-prayer, blinking like he'd seen a ghost. Clara didn't wait for the sermon. She stepped into the aisle, heartbeat loud in her ears. "I ain't here to confess," she said. "Ain't here to defend myself neither." The room stilled. "I came to speak for anyone who ever got called a mistake and believed it. For the women who were blamed for surviving. For the babies they said should be forgotten." A murmur rose, then hushed. "My husband," she said, "was a man folks praised in daylight, but feared behind closed doors. He put hands on me. Called me less than dirt. Left bruises no one asked about. And when I ran, y'all called me the sinner." She looked around, not with anger, but clarity. "I won't hide no more, and I won't raise these girls to think silence is holy." A breath held by the whole room. Then a sound, soft, certain. Wade's boots, stepping forward. He reached her side, turned to face the crowd. Didn't say a word, just reached for her free hand. Held it, public, plain, permanent. Gasps, disbelief, but no one moved to stop them. Reverend Cale lowered his eyes. Evelyn Ridge pursed her lips but didn't speak. The sermon never happened that day, but grace did, not from the pulpit, but from the pew. They didn't talk about the church, didn't speak of the whispers or the way Evelyn clutched her pearls like Clara had set the place on fire. They just went home. That night, the cabin was quiet, not heavy, not tense, just still, like the air after lightning when something's been cleared. Wade rose early, before the frost thawed, hammered a second cup hook beside the sink. A small thing, took less than a minute. But now 2 mugs hung side by side. He didn't tell Clara. He didn't need to.
Later that day, she gathered a torn baby dress from the wash. One of the twins had caught it on a nail. She sat by the fire with needle and thread, mended it, slow, careful. And when she finished, she pulled a scrap of cotton from her apron and stitched a small W into the hem. No one asked her to. No one saw her do it. But it was there now, marked. That evening, Wade hauled fresh wood inside. Not just for the night, but enough for a week. He cleaned out the hearth, laid new kindling, and lit the fire with steady hands. When Clara passed, she paused. The flame burned soft, steady. "You think it'll hold?" she asked. Wade looked up. "The fire?" She nodded. He offered a faint smile. "Not unless someone keeps feeding it." She said nothing, just reached down, added one more log. That night, the twins slept through the cold without fuss. Clara hung her shawl beside Wade's coat, the two swaying side by side in the doorway, like they'd always been there. No ceremony, no rings, just firelight, initials stitched in thread, and 2 cups waiting at the sink. And in that, a promise more binding than any law ever written. How are you feeling witnessing this scene? Let us know your emotions in the comments below. Spring arrived like a promise whispered, not shouted. The snow melted slow that year, like even the land didn't want to rush. Clara watched it drip from the eaves, soak into the garden beds, disappear into the thirsty earth. Marshall Boone never came back. No more riders showed on the horizon. No more letters came bearing threats or demands. The world that once pressed its boots against her throat simply stopped knocking. The town, too, found other fires to huddle around. A cattle rustler up north, a widow remarrying too soon. Clara's name stopped curling on tongues, not because it was forgiven, but because it wasn't interesting anymore. And that, in its own strange way, felt like grace. One afternoon, Wade returned from the trading post with oats and kindling. He placed a small parcel wrapped in twine onto the kitchen table. A letter. Clara stared at it for hours. It bore a Missouri seal, scrawled by a hand that once signed her marriage papers. Her late husband's brother again. The last thread of bloodline trying to pull her back. She didn't cry, didn't shake. That night, when the girls were asleep and Wade was carving in the shed, she lit a match. The paper curled like dry leaves. The words, talk of inheritance, unfinished matters, demands for proper upbringing, turned to ash before they could settle. She carried the small tin out to the porch and let the wind scatter it westward into the hills. Not forgiven, not forgotten, just left behind. She stood there a while, arms crossed, feeling the cold no longer crawl so deep. From inside, the smell of wood smoke and goat stew drifted to meet her. The girls stirred in their sleep, murmuring nonsense and peace. And Wade, without saying a word, stepped out behind her. He didn't ask what she'd burned. He didn't need to. He just stood beside her, hands in his coat, eyes on the horizon. For the first time in her life, Clara realized, some ghosts don't need to be fought. They just need to find no one left to haunt. Come May, the thaw gave way to dirt that begged for seeds. Clara's hands, once bound in fear, now dug into soil with purpose. She cleared the weeds, tilled rows by hand, and planted peas, turnips, and prayer. Not the kind from books, but the kind buried in calluses and watered with sweat. Every morning she checked the sprouts. Every evening she tucked the girls in with dirt still under her nails. Wade, meanwhile, took to the cradle. The first one had been pieced together from old wood and war spare, sturdy but not meant for memory. This time he shaped it from pine he felled himself, sanded smooth, carved each post with small ridges like river stones. He didn't say much while he worked, but Clara noticed the initials on the footboard, small, quiet letters, M and J, the girls' names, spelled in love, not obligation. One day she found a wooden horse sitting on the porch, rough-hewn, wobble-legged, but proud. The twins squealed as they crawled toward it, fingers grasping, eyes wide. One tried to eat the ear, the other tried to ride it backward. Clara laughed, a sharp, sudden sound. She hadn't meant to, but it came anyway. Wade looked up from splitting logs. His face softened just a little. "I'll make another," he said, brushing sawdust from his arm. "This one's gonna lose a leg by sundown." She didn't answer, just nodded, still smiling. Their days were simple. Firewood, feeding, stitching, carving. Some days passed without more than 10 words between them, but when they did speak, it mattered. Like the time she handed him a basket of peas and said, "We might need a bigger pot next season." Or when he fixed the fence gate and said, "Might need another stall soon, for a third." They weren't dreaming. They were planting. And things they never dared to imagine began to grow. No longer hiding, no longer waiting for the sky to fall, just living. And for the first time in years, Wade no longer woke up reaching for a rifle. He reached for a kettle and poured 2 cups. The spring sun came later in the mountains, slipping gentle through the gaps in the shutters like it was asking permission. Inside the cabin, warmth lived in the corners, not just from the fire, but from the way boots sat in pairs, the way laughter echoed soft from little voices. Clara sat by the hearth, a worn book in hand, its pages fluttering with time. Not reading, just holding. Wade sat cross-legged on the floor, working leather with fingers rough from years of war and wood. He wasn't fast, but he was sure. He stitched slow, binding the soft soles of what would be the twins' first real boots. No one spoke, but it wasn't quiet. The kind of silence they shared now wasn't emptiness, it was fullness unspoken. One of the girls toddled forward, dragging her ragged doll by one arm. She looked up at Clara and said, clear as a bell, "Mama." The other, chewing on the hem of her sleeve, waddled toward Wade and mumbled, "Pa," just once. Wade's hands stopped moving. He looked at Clara, eyes wide like the day she first stepped into his life, barefoot and bruised. And without a word, tears came, not from sorrow, but from the soft breaking of something long frozen. He cried like a man who'd held too much and finally laid it down. Clara reached across the space and touched his wrist. They didn't need to say it. They were already there. No fanfare, no ring on fingers, no preacher's words. Just 2 souls, a fire that never went out, and names spoken by children who'd never known the world before healing. That night, the wind carried pollen through the air, not dust. The ground softened. Somewhere beyond the pines, an owl called once, then went quiet. Inside, Wade laid the finished boots beside the cradle. Clara folded the tiny dresses with hands that no longer shook. The twins slept curled together, arms across one another's bellies like roots finding soil. And on the windowsill, 2 cups steamed in the stillness. If your heart has ever carried a wound, if you've ever walked alone through a long, silent winter, then maybe you understand. Some loves don't need a name. Sometimes all it takes is a look, a shared warmth, a kitchen light that stays on. Like this story if you've ever touched that kind of peace, or if you're still waiting for someone to hang a second cup hook by the sink, just for you. If you like this video, comment number 1. If you don't, comment number 2. Please subscribe to the channel to watch more videos and give me more motivation to collect and share other stories.